Hello, I'm Kads and welcome to today's video. It is finally time to answer the question I've seen many times in the comment section of why don't you use X champion? We're going to talk about my silly, crazy, zany raid restrictions that lead to my unique playstyle. Now, before we get into this, I do want to issue a few disclaimers. First of all, this is meant to be more of a lighthearted video, so don't take it too seriously, but nonetheless, this is the way that I like to play the game. And with that said, the intent of this is not to coerce people to play my way or to judge people for playing the way they play. Play the game however you want to play, as I'm doing for myself. But if you do feel compelled to judge, then be sure to let me know how crazy I am in the comment section down below. So for this discussion, there are two categories. One is just champion exclusions, and the other is gear or gear set exclusions. So starting things off with the champions that I do not use, let me first explain that there are subcategories to the champions category, and there's some that I don't use in PvE specifically, and some that I don't use in PvP specifically. At the top of the list, and these are in no particular order, we have the block damage type champions. So for example, I do have Roshgard the Tower, and I do have him built in a protection set that is primarily for PvP, in case I want to counter a Candraphon. But in this unique instance, I don't use block damage teams for any PvE content. So that includes Tower like him, includes Helikath, includes Warcaster or Demitha. Any of those champions who put block damage on an AoE, I don't use them. Now the first question you might ask is, why on earth would you want to do that? And I will say that not everything I say here has to make sense. It's more of a feeling. This is how I interpret the game. This is how I want to play. And to me, it just feels like a little too cheesy, a little too cutting cornery. So I don't really like doing that because you're just avoiding damage by blocking it, and you can just kind of do things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do outside of that. So that's part of the reason why my clan boss team or Demon Lord clan boss team is traditional. I don't want to use an Unkillable team or a block damage team, although I think they are pretty awesome and fun for other people. I just don't want to use it for myself. So primarily it just doesn't feel right. It just feels like you're kind of cheating because you're just avoiding all damage. Not to say that it's not useful, but for me, it's just something I don't like to do. So with that in mind, it probably won't surprise you that Unkillable champions fall under the same category for the same reason. So that's your Sir Nicholas, your Man-Eaters, and your Emic Trunkhearts. I would say the one exception here is that I would be willing to use them in PvE if they have some other useful ability in their kit that's not just dependent on being unkillable. So for example, Man-Eater here, somewhat underrated, but on the A1, as long as he crits, it's an AoE decrease attack, so that's a very useful ability that might be useful in some Ogren specific dungeon tournament or something like that, which they haven't really done for a long time. So I kind of miss those. But also the A2 here, which fully steals turn meter on a 3-turn cooldown. So stuff like that, where there's other elements of the champion's kit besides the unkillable ability here, then I might still use them in certain PvE aspects. In a similar vein for like Emic Trunkheart, the taunt ability is part of the unkillable, but taunt could be useful in like the Shogun's Grove or something like that. So the byproduct of taunting would be being unkillable, but I wouldn't be necessarily worried about dying if I'm taunting the Shogun, because that's just how it works. Next up, we have Cardinal, everyone's favorite arena cheese champion. And you might be able to sense the theme here of avoiding the cheesy strategy in the game. So Cardinal, of course, is very well known. Used to be Swift Parry, but now is definitely 1000% always in Stoneskin, because she has this ability here where she can revive all dead allies and boost their turn meter to max. And what that means is that they are guaranteed to go next, because maximum is above fully filling or above 100% full turn meter. And so I've been around the block long enough to be heavily annoyed by this. When you kill everyone and then she picks it all back up and they take a turn and you instantly wipe. Obviously there are many ways to counter this. You can use a Lydia, but then a lot of people use like a Godseeker Aniri, a Daywalker or something, a Brachus the Shifter, something to bait out the Lydia passive, maybe a Sun Wukong in the more recent days. But the point is, she is very easy to counter if you have a team that can work around it, but nonetheless it's still annoying of a strategy to deal with, and things that I find annoying I'd rather not do myself. So Cardinal is on the list as well for PvP specifically. Now this next one is probably going to be the most controversial, but I do not use Seer. And the reason I don't like to use Seer is that it honestly just does not feel right. Her Karma Burn ability feels absolutely busted and broken. Not necessarily in a bad way, but it's over the top. It does millions of damage to waves because you just blow them up. You put her in Savage, give her a decent debuffer. Could be a Ghostborn or usually like a Lydia. You pair her with a couple of buff champions and waves just fall over. Don't get me wrong, that is absolutely amazing. And if anyone asked me for a suggestion for a team for a dungeon, I would tell them to use Seer because again, this is my playstyle. I'm not going to force it on other people. I'm not going to judge them for it. So I would recommend using any of these champions that I don't use if it suits you. But for me personally, it just feels too broken. And the typical follow-up question to that is, why on earth then do you want a Poison Explosion team? As I've said in basically every single Shard Pool video, why do I want Eleanoril and or Xavia? Well, to me, Poison Explosion is a bit different. Because of how poisons work, they deal 5% of the enemy's max HP every time they tick. So technically, all you have to do is place 20 ticks worth of poison on all enemies and they will die eventually. So a lot of my teams actually work by just placing some poisons, adding in some wave DPS, and letting the poisons do some damage as well as the DPS do some damage. But effectively, I could just put a bunch of poisons out there, wait 2 to 3 turns, and they all die. And the Poison Explosion aspect of it just speeds up that waiting time, so you don't need to have a CC champion, you can just detonate all the poisons. But the point is that you actually set up the condition where they will die because they already have the poisons on them. And to me, that just feels better. Again, this is not necessarily a logical argument, but to me, that just feels better. I can see the poisons, they are there. It's not just decrease defense and weaken, and then the waves just fall over because Seer. So to me, that feels better, and I would still love to have one of them. Granted, they are a lot less useful, especially with the hard mode dungeons and other such things, so they're not as practical as far as going into hard mode, but for normal mode, they would have been amazing had I pulled them forever and ever ago. And next up, oh brother, we have my least favorite arena champion in the entire game, Candraphon. Good God. I absolutely, and I don't use this word lightly, but I absolutely hate Candraphon. Going against him in the arena is the bane of one of the banes of my arena existence, because you can do everything right, kill everyone on the team, even get him low, swift parry procs, turns around, one-shots your entire team, GG, you lose. I have seen that tentacle slap animation so many times in just a one-shot of my entire team dying, and I'm so done with it. Can't stand it, and I'm even ashamed to have pulled him on my account. He stays in the reserve vault, never to be used. I hate him that much, so I refuse to use him on my own. Now, in fairness, he is a very, very, very strong champion, and again, I recommend you guys to use him. If you have him, don't be like me, but the combination of his abilities just makes him so difficult to deal with if you don't have the right things. It used to just be swift parry all day, every day in the past, and some people still use swift parry on him until today. Some people have switched over to Stoneskin, which makes it even worse because then he's basically immune to damage, and then he just hides and still can one-shot your entire team. He doesn't necessarily need Savage to deal damage. That's the incredible part. Partially because of the passive here, where he just gets a basically increase attack, 40% damage boost while under a veil or a perfect veil, and he also gets bigger than strengthen, right? It's 40% damage reduction while under a veil. That's in addition to veil reducing damage you take from AoEs. I think perfect veil is 15% and veil is 7.5. I forget what the values are, but essentially he's a lot tankier than he should be when he's under a veil, and he hits so much harder when he's under a veil. And to make matters worse, if you hit him when he's under a veil, you boost his turn meter, kind of like a Mortu Macabre, where he just kind of slides further in the queue and just gets ready to just slap your team into the ground. And the worst part to me is the active effect of the passive, where it'll just put him under a veil for one turn that's irremovable, and all you have to do is fill turn meter, because who does that in arena? So you fill turn meter the tiniest bit, even if it's like a mastery proc from Arcane Celerity or something like that, or Cycle of Revenge. Any of those turn meter boosts will put him under an irremovable veil, which activates the passive, which means he takes less damage and does a ton more damage. You couple that with one of the hardest hitting AoEs in the game, as well as the single hardest hitting A1 in the game, where all he has to do is hit a target that has any buff on them, and he hits them twice, and usually that's enough to kill them. Especially with counterattack, retribution, or revenge accessories, you can tickle this dude and he can just come back and slap you back in the ground with the A1. It is crazy. I think I've made my point. Once again, he is an amazing champion. I will say that in fairness, but boy, has he ruined my arena for me in many, many ways over the years. Now, next up, we have his typical companion. And in fairness, this is one where I'm slightly more on the fence. I don't have a Duchess, and if I pulled one, I am honestly not sure how I feel about using her in PvP. On one hand, I would like to have the deterrence to scare people away from attacking my team, particularly in Tag Team Arena, but I also would feel disgusting for using a Duchess because of all of the pain and suffering that I've gone through trying to deal with Duchesses in the arena. Swift Parry, Stoneskin nowadays, protection sets, bolster, you name it, I have seen her in it. It is crazy. Deflection sets, I've seen every single unique combination of a Duchess. She's super tanky, one of the best AoE revivals in the game that hides everyone. One of the best abilities in the game that places increased attack on, set up your nukers and hides everyone under a veil. Very broken in today's meta where you just put 6-piece Stoneskin on her and you're forced to attack her when she has 1 turn left on Stoneskin. Therefore, you do 0 damage to her. And if you kill anyone else around her, she revives them because she hasn't used the revive yet. It's a horrible experience. So I'm not going to say definitively that I would not use her in PvP if I were to get her, but it would be something I'd have to think about very hard, because similar to Candraphon, she is up there as one of my least favorite champions to go against in the arena, and I just don't know if I could deal with having to use her myself and deal with the horrible person I would feel like being. And I guess to continue on the train of hating on very annoying arena champions, we have the infamous Ultimate Deathknight. Now, don't get me wrong, when he came out, I was definitely more of a fan. I do like the provoke on the A1. I do like the decreased attack. The fear can be quite annoying. The shield is decent. It's not as big as a Valkyrie or a Hellcath, but it's something, and some heals to keep him alive works really well. I thought the passive was honestly very amazing because it can help counter a Rotos, it can help counter like a Mountain King or two Macabre type champions like that are guaranteed to be single target only, and it kind of neuters them and forces them to hit him. What I did not foresee was the advent of Stoneskin and everyone putting this guy in, at least in the end game, maybe not in the early game, you're not farming Hydra, therefore you don't have a ton of Stoneskin. But in the end game, everyone puts this guy 0 speed, 6-piece Stoneskin, just sitting there, wasting time. And now you slap Polymorph on him, you put some accuracy on him, so you try to get rid of the Stoneskin, you turn into a sheep, and all he does is just waste your time. It's not that he's hard to kill necessarily. There are ways to deal with it. Obviously, Ramontu can work. Again, you risk of being sheeped. Any buff stripper can work. Mighty Ugo can work, stuff like that. But in the meantime, assuming you don't get sheeped, you still have the rest of the team in arena to deal with while you're trying to kill this dude who will just refuse to die or just sit there under Stoneskin, immune to basically all damage. I find that it just slows fights down horrendously. It's the most annoying thing. He's on almost every high-tier defense team still to this day. And honestly, even though he's a good thing for the game overall, the mixture of him and Stoneskin is just an absolute cancer in the PvP experience, and I don't think anyone enjoys it. But at the same time, people have to enjoy it enough to put it in their own defenses. Not judging anyone, but I'm definitely looking at some people right now. But apparently people are more than willing to put it in their defense and make other people suffer, even though they hate suffering through it themselves. That confuses me, but I digress. Taking a step back from peak annoyance in PvP, we do have the lesser tier of Mashold, who I just don't want to use in PvP. I'm not a fan of Fear and True Fear at all in the game. I hate it. PvP, it's annoying, because you never know, maybe can I use the ability, can I not? 50-50 shot. True Fear especially, if you use it, you're screwed and you lose the ability forever if you get the bad RNG, and it's just an absolutely terrible gamble, and I really hate that aspect of RNG as far as PvP is concerned. So Mashold, of course, is notorious here for the 2-turn Fear, True Fear, for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown, meaning that more likely than not, you're just going to fear out of your abilities, and whatever else is on his team is just going to deal with you, because you're going to lose your abilities, you're going to lose your turns, and there's not much you can do about it, unless you have enough resistance to deal with that, or you have immunity on. But even if you do have immunity on, there is a chance that if he has enough accuracy, he can steal buffs from you, and then he deals a lot more damage to targets that have no buffs, and then the AoE on the A1, which is useful. The leech hitting multiple people, but he can hit really hard. He can just keep your entire team locked down if the fears proc, and it can be easily GG just from him taking 1 turn. Now, with all that said, obviously you can see here that I do have him built, and he is 6-starred, ready for masteries. I built him in a stalwart set, and that is for in the off chance that I do get that Valkyrie that I've wanted forever and ever now, I would rebuild a Demon Lord Clan Boss team around Mashold, using his ability to make it a 2-to-1 speed ratio, and thus I would be using him for PvE. PvE, which is fine because one, Fear is basically useless against the Demon Lord clan boss, so I don't really have to worry about that aspect of it. And also he just, again, hits relatively hard, and so I want to utilize his kit in that way. But for PvP purposes, I will not be fearing you guys either, so fear not, pun intended. And last up, we have potentially another controversial one depending on your perspective, but that is Geomancer, specifically for PvE content. Now, the reason I don't like Geomancer is because he's essentially one of those champions that's only useful for their passive, and the passive is absolutely broken. Now, his passive has been through some level of reworks just to make it smoother, but essentially, as long as he places a burn on an enemy and they attack him or any of the allies, it will reflect some damage back. Usually that's negligible, of course, but when he reflects that damage, he also has a chance to proc essentially a Giant Slayer hit. Now, on release, it just worked by reflecting with Giant Slayer the Mastery, but in this case, nowadays you can run him with War Master, and his passive has a built-in Giant Slayer on the reflected damage. Once again, I'm not saying that you guys should not use him. He's definitely an amazing champion who can do great things, and he just basically breaks a bunch of bosses in the game because you can just kind of sit back, put out the burn, and let bosses kill themselves, like Nether Spider, for example. Iron Twins, very popular there. But my issue with it is that, one, I just think that's a broken ability, and it's a relatively easy requirement to meet. But more importantly, if you took away the passive, he really wouldn't do much at all, and he would be in the vault just like mine is. So that he can turn meter still, which is useful, kind of like the man eaters of the world, stuff like that. But just by single target, stealing turn meter and placing HP burn and weaken, he would not be very useful. Removing all buffs, again, he wouldn't be, or stripping all buffs on a single target would not be that great. AoE decrease accuracy could be kind of useful, but he really wouldn't do much without the passive, and I think it's really overpowered, at least for an epic. Now, of course, the most common follow-up question to that take is, of course, what about Underpriest Brogni? Doesn't he do the same thing? To a degree, yes. On his passive here, he reflects damage when he's hit, or when any allies hit under a shield, and he can also reflect Giant Slayer hits. But the thing is here, the condition is a lot harder to maintain, because if you slap through the shield, then you can't reflect any more damage, and for stuff like bosses, they have more than enough damage to just hit through shields. Therefore, it's not going to just stay up there forever unless you're running an Infinity Shield comp. But even then, for like Demon Lord and Hydra, either you hit the turn count limit, or eventually the boss can just slap through the shield anyways. So there is a finite amount of shielding that you can do before eventually you will still die, unless you won't really get the benefit of the Giant Slayer procs. But I think the more important difference here is that if you took away that aspect of it, meaning that he can still reflect damage when you hit the shield just like that and it still heals you, but if he didn't have the Giant Slayer procs, he would still be an amazing champion. You do have increased attack, block buffs, and a pretty big shield, again, that could heal you when you're hit. You can also grow shields, very unique ability in the game, and then also can remove 1 debuff from all allies, and then HP burn on the A1. Not that amazing, but it's still cool. So overall, he'd still be an amazing champion, even if his passive didn't solely reflect Giant Slayer. That's my only issue with it, reflecting the Giant Slayer hits. So while they are definitely comparable, and I can see that argument for me personally, and again, you don't have to agree, but I find Brogni as fine. I accept the fact that the Giant Slayer procs are there. I don't really prefer it, and I use him in my Demon Lord Clan boss team, not because of that, but because he has block debuffs and the shield that can grow and protect the team, stuff like that. But I definitely do not use Geomancer in any areas of the game. So those are all of my champion exclusions, but we're not done yet. I did say that there are 2 categories here, and the second category is gear/gear sets. Thankfully, this is a lot shorter of a list. I do like most of the gear sets in the game. They have their uses. Some of them are kind of useless, but most of them are useful even in niche situations. However, there are a few exceptions of those that I definitely refuse to use. First off being Swift Parry. Now, in a similar vein to dealing with Duchesses, dealing with Candies, dealing with old Cardinal, who used to be in Swift Parry, stuff like that, or just any champion in Swift Parry, it is the most annoying thing in Arena when you think someone's about to die. Even if you bomb them, you do anything, right when they're about to die, unkillable, they turn around, revive the entire team. Turn around, kill your entire team. Whatever ability they have, it is so annoying. And I like to win with like skill and stuff like that. Again, that's just me. I don't like to win with pure luck. It's like, well, 50-50 shot. Oh, you didn't kill her. She's alive. Duchess revives everyone and you die. Whereas in an equivalent instance, you could have it not proc and you kill everyone and you win. I really don't like leaving it up to pure RNG to survive on arena offense or defense, and I just hate Swift Parry, and so I refuse to use it. Also, it does kind of take away from the forge materials that I would use for other sets. And so you can see here I have a massive stack of core hammers that have never been used. I think I made a few pieces for the Romanti missions, and that's basically it. But Swift Parry, refuse to ever use. Next up, you know it's here, and that would be Stoneskin. Now, of course, as you can see here on the screen, I definitely have Stoneskin on some champions. However, I treat it as a two-piece resistance set. So the base resistance set just has 40 resistance, but this one adds a little bit of HP. And so I just treat it as a resistance plus two-piece filler set if the stats match. But I have never and will never go all the way up to 4-piece or 6-piece Stoneskin. Now, I understand that the intent of Stoneskin was to help combat the speed meta. And for those who don't know, the old meta in Arena used to be, as long as you were faster, you just win. Reaction came in to kind of help with that, but initially that was something that only the whales had. But as the game has progressed, CVC has been around for a much longer time. More people have reaction, and thus, to me, I think reaction was an acceptable and enough of a solution to deal with the go first meta, meaning that you put 1 to 2 pieces on your core champions and you can turn that crit hit into a weak hit, and you're basically good to go. And more importantly, it had a counter, a direct counter, where essentially if you're worried about reaction, you can just waste the first turn with some CC, stun them, sleep them, whatever, wait out that first turn and then kill them on the second turn and you're good to go. With Stoneskin, however, you're immune to basically all physical damage, you're immune to almost every debuff except for bombs, and unfortunately, if you do try to bomb them, most people run Polymorph on their Stoneskin champions, so you're going to get sheeped if you try to bomb them. So there's basically nothing you can do aside from sit there and wait. And like we talked about with UDK, he's going to outlast you if you're willing to wait until Stoneskin runs out, because he's usually built with no speed. So again, with the Duchesses, you have the Candies, you have the Hefraks, you have the Morty McCobbs, you have all of these people who are basically immune. The other problem is that there's a 50-50 shot that even if you try to remove Stoneskin, nothing happens, which I think is absolutely busted. So again, you're limiting the amount of counters that people can do. And again, if you even try to remove it, you might get Polymorph for removing it. So it's just, it's too strong, even as 4 pieces, because you can fail to remove it. You can fail to place the bombs because you get sheeped. You can fail to do damage because they're just sitting under Stoneskin, and you just die. Not because they did anything amazing, but they just put 4 pieces of Stoneskin on their champion and they just can't die for the first turn. So once again, it's a little too much of that RNG aspect of the game, but also it's just nearly impossible to deal with, particularly when you have a certain combination of champions together, like Terrace Marichka and Stoneskin, and then it's kind of GG. There's nothing you can do about that, because if you try to bomb her, she puts block damage and it does nothing, and then you get counterattacked by Terrace and you're dead. So it's like there's certain champions combinations in particular where you just can't do anything about it, and it's super annoying, and I just do not want to participate in that. I know people are going to do it. I assume most champions, especially if they're solo defenses, are in Stoneskin, and I prepare accordingly with my bombs for sure. Even if they're Polymorph, I generally risk it just in case, because that's the best counter, even if it's still kind of risky. But for myself, I guess I'm revealing my secrets here. If you ever see me in Arena, don't worry, I'm not in Stoneskin, I'm not in Swift Parry. But for me, it's just not something I'd ever want to do. And last up, this is not a gear set per se, but it is an accessory set, if you want to call it that, and those are revenge accessories. Now, initially, I was a huge fan of these because I had the simple-minded brain of thinking, oh, this is great for PvE, because, hey, Demon Lord Clan Boss, extra counterattacks means more damage. You know, Retribution procs do a lot of damage overall in the course of a fight, so having extra chances to do that would be great. Counterattacking on certain bosses, particularly like with an R-Tack, for example, where you can extend a burn, or a Walking Tomb Dren, where you can pop a burn when you're hit, or stuff like that. I thought, this is cool, I like this change. And then all of a sudden, it started to invade the arena. Did you poke that Lydia? Now you're feared. Did you stab the Candy? You're dead. Did you hit the Uko or the Tormund? You're stunned. And it's just so painful to the point of just absolute misery that now essentially you just touch a champion, they hit this 5% chance, or maybe up to 15 if you have 3 accessories, and the counterattacks come and you just wipe. And it was fine with retribution, where it's like at least you have to deal a certain amount of damage to them and then they can counterattack, and it's like, all right, that's fair. But this one, you can literally just touch them and they counterattack, and you can fall over depending on who's counterattacking. So for me, at least in the sake of PvP, I don't want to use this. And by virtue of that, because there is some overlap for me in terms of champions used for PvP and PvE, I just don't buy these at all. I, again, encourage people to do this. It is a decent chance, or a decent way to get 5 to 6 star accessories every week. So go to your clan shop and for sure buy these if you have the Expired Clan Gold. But I prefer to use it on Legendary Tomes and the Energy if they pop up, and the Void Shard and stuff like that. But for me, it's just, it is so annoying. You're sensing the theme here. Things that annoy me, I don't want to inflict on other people, generally speaking. Now, the very astute of you might be thinking that, well, he said all of these things that annoy him, but there's one glaring thing that he failed to mention, right? Wouldn't Polymorph be on this list? And you would be right that I do find it extremely annoying, and I don't think it was good for the game. However, I think it could be balanced such that it would be a fine addition to the game. Now, that being said, unfortunately, there aren't enough blessings in the game, particularly ones that help defensive nukers like Duchess here, where I really wanted more so the extra defense. I used to use Polymorph on like my Necret, on my Python, just more as a deterrent, because for me, like in 3v3 arena, the thing I want the most is to not be attacked. I can figure out a way to get wins on offense, and I don't necessarily want wins on defense, but I want those teams that look so scary that people are like, nah, I don't want to deal with that. Let me go find a better team. So for me, Polymorph is always a deterrence, and I want people to be afraid to go against my team and thus not fight me. But clearly that doesn't work, because I definitely get attacked on the daily even when I put in my real defenses. So it's not working. I don't have a bunch of super meta champions that can really scare people away, but nonetheless, I do try. Unfortunately, it is still the RNG aspect of they might get sheeped when they try to do something to my team, and so yes, I'm partaking in that little bit. But I think we can take this moment to talk about why I think the Polymorph debuff is a little bit too powerful. And that is because it calculates the chance of proccing for every unique instance of breaking the condition. So when you try to place a debuff, strip buffs, or steal buffs, you have a chance for each individual instance of those to get polymorphed. So it sounds like, oh, it's only a 5% chance. Not quite. If for like a Madame Ceres or a Ramontu, you have a 5% chance for every buff that you remove, on top of a 5% chance for every debuff that you place. So if you're going against like a Siphi, she puts off the block debuff, increase speed, increase defense. You have 3 chances for stripping those 3 buffs per champion that you remove it on that has polymorph. And then if you're using Madame Ceres, then you place decrease attack and decrease defense, and every single instance has a chance to polymorph you, and that's what makes it so common for buff strippers in this particular instance. And to make it worse, the way it's coded is that it goes in turn order. So if you get polymorphed on the first buff strip on the lead champion who has polymorph, then everything that you would have done after that, so stripping any other people's buffs or placing any other debuffs, won't happen because you got sheeped right at the beginning. So one, that's a tip to put polymorph champions at the front of your arena teams, but also it's just annoying that you can't propagate your effect because you got stopped right at the start. So if you're trying to place a bomb on a polymorph champion, if you get polymorphed on the first lead champion, no one else gets bombed. No one else gets slept if you're using Gaius or whatever. And so it can be very, very overbearing to deal with. And so what I think this really should be is that there's just a 5% chance if you do any of these things and not for each individual instance of it, which makes it a really, really high percentage when you stack all of them together. And that's why, again, the debuffers and buff strippers get ridiculously or are notorious for being sheeped, and they're basically outside of the meta currently. I think with that change, even with Fearsome Presence increasing this by 5%, even at the maximum of 20 going up to 25. So if it was just a 25% chance flat when you did any of the things that can proc it, that would be a much more balanced ability, and we wouldn't really have all of the problems that we have today. It would still be annoying when it goes off, but obviously most people aren't going to have 6-star way hitting outside of the whales at the end game. So for majority of us in the 1 to 3-star range, worst case, you'd have to deal with a 10% chance, which is a lot more tolerable than 5% times 8 or 10% times 8 instances. So yes, I do use polymorph. I wish I didn't have to, but again, in cases of defensive based nukers, there's not as many options because I do want defense on my Stultus, for example, or defense on my Kyoku, who's just more of a tank. I'd like the resistance on Ramontu, so but he also has high accuracy, so he can actually land it, because they did make that change, which did help somewhat as far as getting polymorph off of like a Duchess with 0 accuracy, but I also had to remove it from my Pythion and my Necret, who also have no accuracy, so there's a give and take there. I was fine with that change, but I think going forward, if they were to change it again, and I really hope they do, just alleviating that aspect of every individual instance counting multiple times would really make it not as bad. All right, so hopefully that answers the question of why don't you use X champion? Once again, the point of this video was not to convince people to join me or to pass judgment on those who partake in using these champions. You are free to do whatever you want. This is just my particular and unique playstyle, and that's how I like to go through the game. Feel free to comment down below how crazy you think I am, but also feel free to comment if you have any other champion or gear set restrictions for yourself like me. As always, if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel for more content. Well, maybe not like this one, but for more content in the future. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.